being raised inside a carefully structured business plan. Every decision measured, every conversation transactional. My father, Grant Sullivan, wasn't just a man. He was a brand, a self-made tech mogul, known for innovation, ambition, and ruthless determination. Sullivan Technologies, the company he built from nothing, was the cornerstone of his world. My mother often joked bitterly that his true wife was his business, while we were merely dependents listed in fine print. In our family, affection wasn't something you were given, it was earned. Love came at the price of achievement, and my older brother Lucas was the star performer. From childhood, Lucas was groomed meticulously to inherit the Sullivan legacy. Even at 12, he wore tailored suits, carried a briefcase, and recited financial metrics at dinner. My father would beam, clapping him on the shoulder, as if praising a promising junior executive rather than his own son. Meanwhile, I was relegated to the sidelines, a spectator expected to applaud quietly. My father never explicitly said I was inferior, he simply made it known through indifference. I once overheard him chatting with investors at a corporate gala, proudly boasting about Lucas's brilliance. When someone asked about his daughter, he paused, seemingly confused, before finally remembering to mention me. Emily is bright, he admitted reluctantly, but her heart isn't in business. She'll find something else. Something else, like a vague consolation prize. That evening haunted me. Even at 13, I understood I'd never win his approval by chasing Lucas's path. And maybe that was why, deep down, I rejected it. Unlike my brother, who eagerly followed my father's blueprint, I quietly dreamed of a life far removed from boardrooms and business deals. My passion lay in storytelling, in weaving narratives that could capture the complexities of human emotion. Yet, every time I mentioned this aspiration, my father simply shook his head, dismissing my dreams as childish fantasies. One day, shortly after my 18th birthday, I confronted him with determination. "Dad," I said nervously over dinner, "I've been accepted into a creative writing program. It's prestigious, and it's exactly what I want to do." He glanced up from his smartphone briefly, eyebrows raised. "Creative writing?" he echoed skeptically. "Emily, that's not a career. It's a hobby. You should reconsider before wasting your potential." My mother, quietly stirring her coffee, said nothing. Lucas stared at his plate, uncomfortable with confrontation. My father's dismissal felt crushing, yet strangely liberating. At that moment, I understood clearly. If I wanted his approval, I'd have to sacrifice myself entirely, becoming a second-rate version of Lucas. But if I wanted happiness, I'd have to let go of him completely. I chose happiness. Leaving home to study literature felt like stepping onto shaky ground. For years, I'd lived within the carefully guarded walls of my father's expectations. Now, I was navigating unfamiliar territory alone. College was my rebellion, a statement that I wasn't merely an investment to be molded for profit. I studied furiously, poured myself into writing stories, creating worlds I wished I could live in, and slowly began to find my voice. Yet despite my successes, scholarships, published short stories, praise from respected mentors, my father remained unimpressed. When I called home to share the news that my work had won a prestigious student award, his reaction was chilly. "That's nice, Emily, but have you considered business electives? Literature won't pay bills." It hurt, but each dismissal strengthened my resolve. I didn't need his validation, not anymore. Years later, long after graduation, when I'd become a respected novelist and started teaching writing at a prominent university, my father's business hit a rough patch. Sullivan Technologies was facing a crisis. A serious data breach had rattled investors, Lucas's leadership faltered, and my father's carefully built empire was unraveling rapidly. One rainy afternoon, my phone rang, displaying an unfamiliar corporate number. Against my better judgment, I answered. It was Lucas, sounding desperate, something I'd never heard in his usually calm, composed voice. "Emily," he began cautiously, "Dad and I need your help." My heart quickened slightly, a complex mix of curiosity and bitterness. "My help?" I repeated carefully. "Why me?" Lucas sighed heavily, vulnerability creeping into his words. "Our reputation is ruined, shareholders are panicking, and we're losing partners. But you have influence now. People respect you. You've built connections through your writing and your platform." I leaned back against my desk, processing his request. "So, what exactly do you want?" "We need positive PR. We need people to trust us again. and you can help reshape the narrative. Lucas explained anxiously. Dad didn't want to ask you directly. He didn't think you'd come, but we don't have another option. Bitterness tightened my throat. After decades of neglect, I was suddenly valuable. But the request wasn't lost on me. They didn't actually need me. They needed what I'd built without them. The very thing my father had always dismissed. I'm not a PR tool, Lucas, I responded firmly. I've spent my life proving my worth without Dad's approval. Now you both want to use my success to salvage your mistakes? There was silence. Then Lucas whispered, voice breaking slightly, Emily, we're family. I exhaled slowly, sadness mingling with quiet resolve. We haven't been family for years, I finally said, my voice soft but unwavering. Family doesn't use each other as lifelines in times of crisis. That's not love, it's convenience. Lucas tried again, desperation evident. Emily, please. Dad won't admit it, but he's scared. He regrets how he treated you. I smiled bitterly. My father, scared, regretful? Maybe, or perhaps just cornered and finally understanding his errors. Either way, it didn't matter anymore. I'm sorry, Lucas, I said gently. I can't fix what you both broke. After hanging up, I stared out the window into the fading rain. My father had taught me many painful lessons. Love had to be earned, approval was conditional, and family could be transactional. But his biggest lesson was the one he'd never meant to teach. I was stronger than his dismissal, and my worth wasn't tied to his approval. As painful as his rejection had been, it had shaped me into someone he couldn't control. A person free to choose herself over anyone else. In that realization, I felt not anger, but gratitude. He had made me strong enough to say no. For years, I had accepted that my family saw me as the outsider. My older sister, Angela, had always been the family's shining star, the natural leader, the one who effortlessly charmed everyone. I'd learned early on that our parents placed their hopes squarely on her shoulders, leaving me free, yet forgotten in her shadow. It didn't help that my parents, Robert and Catherine Evans, had built their lives around an exclusive boutique hotel chain, the Azure. Angela was groomed from childhood to take over the family business. She thrived on attention, reveling in the spotlight. Meanwhile, I quietly built a life for myself outside the family circle, working my way up as a successful event planner with my own clientele. Then, one chilly Friday evening, my phone buzzed unexpectedly. The screen showed my mother's number, a rarity. Hello? I answered carefully. Chloe, she said softly, sounding unusually strained. We need you to come home. Something urgent has come up. I frowned, instantly suspicious. Is everything all right? Not exactly, she admitted quietly. We'll explain when you get here. Later that evening, sitting across from my parents in the dining room of my childhood home, I felt like a stranger. My mother's eyes were red-rimmed, while my father sat stiffly, avoiding eye contact. Angela was conspicuously absent. Where's Angela? I asked cautiously, sensing trouble. My father cleared his throat. That's why we called you. Your sister made a few mistakes. Big mistakes. She's left the family business dangerously exposed. I blinked, stunned. Angela, perfect Angela, had made mistakes? What happened? I pressed carefully. My father sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. She invested a significant portion of the business funds into a risky venture that collapsed overnight. We're facing bankruptcy. My mother interjected quietly. Angela left yesterday, said she couldn't deal with the stress. She hasn't returned our calls. Shock rolled through me. Angela, the golden child, had fled when things got tough. The irony was palpable. All these years I'd been treated as unreliable, second best, unfit to handle the family legacy. Yet here they were, asking me, Chloe, the overlooked one, to fix Angela's mess. Why exactly are you telling me this? I asked cautiously. We know you have contacts, my father said bluntly, finally looking up. You have connections with investors, banks, wealthy clients. You could help us stabilize things until Angela returns. I almost laughed. Until Angela returns? They expected me to clean up the mess, keep things running, then step aside once my sister decided she was ready to reclaim her throne. After years of neglect, they only remembered I existed when they needed my help. And if she doesn't come back? I asked coldly. My father stiffened further. She will. You sound confident, I countered, considering she just abandoned you. He sighed, clearly irritated. Angela's overwhelmed, Chloe. It happens, but family helps each other. That's what matters. His hypocrisy stung. Suddenly family mattered. Suddenly I mattered. Despite myself, I felt pity. My parents looked genuinely lost. The family business, our legacy, was on the brink of collapse. But pity wasn't loyalty, and loyalty was something they'd never given me. Still, some small part of me wondered, could I really let the business collapse, knowing innocent employees and their families depended on it? I'll look into it, I finally conceded, voice measured. But I can't promise anything. Over the next 2 months, I dove headfirst into their financial chaos. Unraveling Angela's reckless mistakes was like untangling a knotted web. Mismanaged accounts, risky investments, neglected debts, all consequences of arrogance and entitlement. I spent late nights and weekends renegotiating loans, reassuring panicked employees, and reaching out to investors to restore confidence. Gradually, the company stabilized. Employees began breathing easier, and investors cautiously expressed renewed confidence. Meanwhile, Angela remained missing, silent, unreachable. Then, just as things began turning around, my mother called again, her voice hesitant. "Chloe, your sister's back. She's ready to return." "Good for her," I replied evenly, exhaustion evident in my tone. "We thought you'd be relieved," my mother pressed, sounding genuinely confused. "Relieved?" I echoed softly. "Why?" She hesitated. "So you can finally go back to your normal life." Normal life, code for being overlooked, ignored, disposable. "I saved this business," I said slowly, the words carefully measured. "I salvaged everything Angela destroyed, and now you expect me to just step aside?" Silence hung thickly between us. My mother finally whispered, "It was always Angela's company. She made mistakes, but she deserves another chance." Something in me snapped. Angela had abandoned them when times got tough. Yet here I was, holding it all together, and they still preferred her. "No," I said simply. "If Angela wants the business, let her come back and earn it." "You can't be serious, Chloe," my father interjected sharply, his voice hardening. "I am," I replied, calm but firm. "I've given everything to fix a mess I didn't create. If you won't acknowledge that, if you still think Angela deserves this more than me, then you can handle the rest without my help." Silence stretched, heavy and charged. My mother's voice finally broke it, quiet but firm. "Is this about money, Chloe?" I laughed bitterly. "No, it's about respect. I refuse to be your backup plan again." I ended the call, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. This moment had been years coming. It wasn't revenge, it was self-respect. Over the next few days, my parents continued to call and send messages, each more frantic than the last. Angela still hadn't returned. The company teetered once again, fragile without me holding it together. Yet I didn't cave. Then one evening, my mother appeared unexpectedly at my door. Her eyes were tired, her expression worn, but this time she didn't ask for help. "I wanted to say I'm sorry," she began softly. "For everything. We never should have pushed you aside." Emotion clogged my throat, but I remained calm. "I appreciate that." "We're learning," she continued, eyes sincere. "Too late, maybe, but we're learning." I nodded slowly, absorbing her words. "That's a start." She hesitated, then gently touched my hand. "We'd like you to take over the business." My breath caught. It was genuine acknowledgement, a recognition of years spent in the shadows. But I'd built something real without them, and finally I understood my worth wasn't tied to their approval. "Thanks, Mom," I said gently, meaning every word. "But my life isn't there anymore. I hope you find peace." "But I already have." She nodded, understanding dawning slowly. When she left, a profound calm settled inside me. The past was finally behind me, and for the first time, my future felt entirely mine. When my sister Vanessa called me out of nowhere after 3 years of silence, I knew something had gone terribly wrong. She never reached out unless things had spiraled out of control, and even then, it was usually to complain, never to ask for help directly. I answered cautiously, my fingers tightening around the phone. "Vanessa, what's going on?" "Liv," she said hesitantly, her voice shaking. "It's Dad. His restaurant, it's failing." For a moment, I didn't respond, absorbing the shock. My father Marco had built La Familia Bistro from the ground up, spending decades perfecting recipes and building a community staple. But he had always favored Vanessa. She was the culinary prodigy, the daughter who'd inherit his legacy. I'd been pushed aside, quietly encouraged to forge my own path, told I had no place in the family empire. "What happened?" I finally asked, trying to mask my emotions. "It's complicated," Vanessa muttered. "He expanded too fast, trusted the wrong people. Now he's drowning in debt. Suppliers are pulling out. The bank called in his loan. So, why are you calling me? I asked softly, suspicion edging into my voice. You both made it clear years ago that I wasn't part of the family business. Vanessa's voice cracked, desperation creeping in. Please, Liv. I don't know who else to call. You're successful. You know people. You know how to fix businesses. Everyone says so. It was painfully ironic. Growing up, my father had constantly praised Vanessa's natural talent while dismissing my business aspirations as childish dreams. When I chose a career as a business consultant instead of following in his footsteps, he'd been openly disappointed. Now, here they were, needing my expertise, the very thing they once belittled. Still, despite the bitterness swelling inside me, a small part of me felt a tug of obligation. After all, he was still my father. All right, I finally conceded. I'll meet him, but no promises. When I arrived at my father's flagship restaurant, I barely recognized it. Once vibrant and bustling, it was nearly empty now, tables vacant, staff looking anxious. Marco sat at a table near the back, looking smaller somehow, his shoulders hunched. Vanessa stood nearby, nervously twisting her hands. Olivia, my father said stiffly as I approached. Thank you for coming. Dad, I greeted him calmly, sliding into the chair opposite him. Vanessa filled me in, but I need specifics. He slid financial papers across the table without meeting my eyes. As I skimmed the numbers, my stomach twisted. The damage was severe. Reckless spending, unpaid vendors, poor cash management. This wasn't just bad luck, it was incompetence. You're in deeper trouble than Vanessa let on, I said finally, keeping my tone professional. This will require drastic action to fix. Marco exhaled sharply, clearly humiliated. We need your help, Olivia. Those words resonated deep within me. For years, he'd made it clear I wasn't good enough. Now he needed me to rescue his dreams. It would have been easy to walk away, leave him to the consequences of his choices, but family loyalty tugged at my heartstrings. Despite our differences, he was still my father. All right, I agreed, meeting his gaze evenly. I'll help, but only on one condition. You give me full control. I decide everything, no exceptions. Marco hesitated, pride flickering in his eyes, but Vanessa quickly intervened. Please, Dad, Olivia can fix this. After a tense pause, he nodded reluctantly. Fine, do what you need to do. For the next 3 months, I threw myself into rebuilding my father's legacy. It wasn't easy. I renegotiated debts, replaced unreliable suppliers, cut costs drastically, and even sacrificed my personal time to personally reassure employees and customers. Slowly, the business stabilized, revenues increased, and the restaurant began filling up again. But one afternoon, just as things were looking up, I discovered an unsettling email from Marco to Vanessa. He had accidentally CC'd me. It read, Vanessa, Olivia fixed the mess. But the phone lit up again. This time it was my mother, Charlotte. Her name glowing on my screen felt like a silent accusation. Our last conversation had ended badly, and she rarely called unless it was serious. I answered cautiously. Emma. Her voice wavered slightly. I really need to talk to you. I exhaled softly, bracing myself. What's wrong, Mom? She hesitated, and when she spoke again, the vulnerability in her tone surprised me. It's about your brother. Jacob's in trouble. I felt my shoulders tense instinctively. Jacob, my younger brother, had always been my parents' favorite, bright, charming, and always forgiven, no matter how severe his mistakes. He'd been entrusted with managing our parents' thriving vineyard, while I had been quietly nudged away, considered less capable, less worthy of the family legacy. Now it seemed he'd stumbled again. What kind of trouble? I asked carefully, suspicion edging into my voice. He made a bad investment, she admitted softly. He thought expanding the winery rapidly would attract bigger buyers. Instead, debts piled up, investors backed out, and we're facing financial ruin. Jacob's completely overwhelmed. He refuses to ask for help, but he won't talk to us. You're the only one who can get through to him. Anger surged beneath my carefully controlled exterior. For years, Jacob had been the family's chosen heir, trusted blindly, forgiven endlessly. I'd built my own life far away, successfully consulting for companies facing financial disasters, yet they'd never acknowledged my achievements. Now, with Jacob's mismanagement threatening everything, they suddenly remembered my expertise existed. I'm surprised you called, I finally said, struggling to keep bitterness from my voice. After all, Jacob's always been the one you trust. She sighed quietly. sadness evident. Emma, please, I know we've made mistakes, your father and I both. But this isn't about pride. If the vineyard collapses, everything your father built over 30 years will vanish. People will lose jobs. We need you. I closed my eyes, fighting internal conflict. I had every reason to refuse. Years of dismissal, years of watching from the sidelines while Jacob was handed everything. But despite all that, I felt a painful sense of responsibility. Could I truly let my father's lifelong dream fall apart, even if he'd overlooked me? Fine, I finally conceded softly. But I'm not promising miracles. Thank you, she whispered, genuine relief flooding her tone. When I arrived at the vineyard the following morning, memories washed over me. The rolling green hills, grapevines stretching toward the sun, the scent of fresh soil. My childhood home felt both familiar and distant. Inside the office, Jacob sat hunched over paperwork, looking exhausted and pale, completely unlike the confident brother I'd always known. He glanced up as I entered, startled, embarrassment crossing his features. Emma, I didn't expect you. That's clear, I replied evenly, approaching the desk. Mom called me. She said things were serious. He slumped back into his chair, running his hands through messy hair. I messed up badly. We expanded too aggressively, took out loans I shouldn't have. Suppliers pulled back, and now, you're drowning. I finished softly. He nodded miserably. I thought I could handle it. I wanted to prove myself. Ironic, I murmured quietly, taking a seat. You've spent your whole life proving yourself effortlessly. Now you know how it feels. Jacob looked away, clearly ashamed. I deserve that. Maybe you do, I said quietly, but I'm not here to punish you. I'm here to help save the vineyard. He glanced up, cautious hope creeping into his eyes. You think you can fix it? I don't know yet, I admitted honestly, reaching for a stack of financial statements. But I'll try. Over the following weeks, I immersed myself in the vineyard's tangled finances. The more I uncovered, the worse things appeared. Jacob had overextended badly, signing agreements without fully understanding them, driven by reckless ambition and youthful arrogance. Suppliers were demanding payment, banks threatened foreclosure, and longtime employees feared unemployment. Slowly, through negotiations, careful financial restructuring, and sleepless nights, I began stabilizing the vineyard's fragile foundation. Each successful agreement, each moment of relief from employees, brought a sense of quiet satisfaction. Jacob watched from the sidelines, humbled but supportive. My parents offered cautious gratitude, finally acknowledging my capabilities, though I sensed lingering guilt in their eyes. Then, as the vineyard finally started regaining its footing, I overheard a hushed conversation between my mother and Jacob in the office late one evening. We're fortunate Emma stepped in, my mother whispered. She really came through for us. Jacob replied bitterly, voice strained. She always does. And you'll push her aside again once everything's back to normal, just like before. My mother's silence spoke volumes. Hurt surged through me, sharp and deep. Despite everything I'd done, despite salvaging their legacy, they hadn't truly changed. Once the crisis passed, I would again become disposable. Stepping into the office, my presence startled them both. My mother quickly masked her shock, but Jacob's expression filled with quiet understanding. Emma, my mother began uncertainly, searching for words. Is Jacob right? I asked gently, voice firm yet calm. Once the vineyard is stable again, will I be forgotten, overlooked, pushed aside? Her silence was my answer. Jacob looked away in shame. I'm sorry, my mother finally murmured, sincere yet helpless. We've been unfair. You deserve better. You're right, I said simply. I do. I'll talk to your father, she added hastily, panic rising. We can fix this. No, I replied softly. You can't. Trust isn't rebuilt with words alone. Jacob finally met my gaze, quiet respect in his eyes. Emma, I never meant... I believe you, I interrupted gently, but intentions aren't enough. Stepping outside, I inhaled deeply, looking over the vineyard bathed in sunset hues. I'd poured my heart into saving their legacy, but now understood my true role clearly. I had finally earned respect, but respect wasn't the same as acceptance. I'd forever remain an outsider in their story, a temporary savior, nothing more. Later that night, my phone vibrated with a text from Jacob. I know we don't deserve it, but please stay. We can't do this without you. I stared at the screen for a long moment before typing a gentle yet firm reply. You'll have to learn. It's your vineyard now, Jacob, not mine. For the first time, Walking away didn't feel like defeat. It felt like freedom. The morning after I left the art gallery for good, my phone began buzzing incessantly. Notifications flooded in, texts, missed calls, emails, all from my former colleagues at Luxora Galleries. The first message I opened came from Jenna, my assistant and closest confidant there. Alex, everything's fallen apart. After you quit, the investors panicked. Benjamin is losing control. It's chaos here. I exhaled deeply, setting the phone aside. Benjamin. The name alone was enough to stir resentment. My older brother had always been charismatic and charming, easily winning our parents' admiration and trust. He had inherited the family's renowned art gallery after years of being the favored child. I had been relegated to managing daily operations, quietly fixing Benjamin's mistakes while he basked in praise. When I finally stepped away, tired of being overlooked and undervalued, everything unraveled almost immediately. An hour later, another call came, this time from an unknown number. I hesitated briefly before answering. Alexandra? A familiar voice said urgently. It was my mother, Margaret. She rarely contacted me directly. Benjamin was always her primary focus. Mother, I replied cautiously, keeping my voice even. To what do I owe this pleasure? She hesitated before speaking carefully. I know we've had our differences, but this is serious. The gallery is imploding. Benjamin can't handle the pressure. Investors are pulling out. Clients are nervous. We need you back. Bitterness rose sharply within me. It had been only 2 weeks since I'd left after discovering Benjamin had secretly credited himself for an exhibition I'd spent months meticulously curating. My parents had dismissed my anger, siding with him as always. You had a chance to support me, I said softly, controlling my frustration. Instead, you stood by Benjamin, just like always. Now you want my help? She sighed, irritation creeping into her tone. It's not personal, Alex. Your family. Benjamin is overwhelmed. We simply need you to step in temporarily. Temporarily, I repeated dryly. Just until Benjamin is ready to take credit again? She was silent, unwilling to admit the truth. I continued firmly. I'm done covering for him. If Benjamin wants the gallery, he can learn to manage it himself. I hung up gently, my heart pounding. Rejecting my mother's request felt liberating yet frightening. They had always been my emotional weak spot, knowing precisely how to manipulate my guilt. Within hours, my phone rang again. This time, Benjamin's name flashed urgently across the screen. I stared at it, contemplating ignoring him, but eventually picked up. Alex. His voice was strained, anxious. Look, I know you're upset. I get it, but this isn't about us right now. The gallery, your gallery, is collapsing. The investors trusted you, not me. They want to hear your voice, your reassurances. Please. My gallery? I repeated coldly. It was never mine, remember? You made that abundantly clear. Benjamin groaned in frustration. Fine, I was wrong. Is that what you want to hear? I took you for granted, but people's livelihoods depend on this. Think about the employees. Think about Jenna. I paused, momentarily conflicted. The mention of Jenna, who had always been loyal to me, stirred my conscience. Alex, please, he urged again, softer this time. Just help stabilize things, then do whatever you want. It was tempting. Part of me still cared deeply for the place I had invested so much of myself into, but another part recognized the manipulation, the convenient apologies, the temporary promises. No, Benjamin, I finally said firmly. You created this mess. You fix it. I ended the call, heart racing, but strangely free. Rejecting Benjamin's plea was my declaration of independence, proof that I wouldn't be manipulated again. The following day, however, Jenna unexpectedly appeared at my apartment, clearly distraught. Her eyes were red-rimmed as she stood at my doorway, voice trembling. Alex, things are worse than you know, she said shakily. Benjamin called a press conference. He blamed you, said you abandoned everyone, that the gallery is suffering because of your selfishness. Investors are furious. Shock and anger surged through me simultaneously. He did what? She nodded miserably, avoiding my eyes. People are turning on you. They think you sabotaged us intentionally. My fists clenched involuntarily. Benjamin's betrayal knew no bounds. He'd publicly vilified me to protect his ego, twisting the narrative, hoping I'd break under the pressure. Jenna, I said carefully, taking a deep breath, do you believe him? She shook her head immediately. Of course not. You were always the heart of that gallery. Benjamin was nothing without your support. Then help me, I said. determination firming my resolve. I'm gonna fight back. That afternoon, I contacted influential art critics and trusted media outlets, offering exclusive insights into the gallery's recent turmoil. Jenna supplied me with confidential emails proving Benjamin's incompetence and mismanagement. With evidence in hand, I crafted a careful but candid statement, sending it to every major publication. 2 days later, headlines shifted dramatically. Luxora Galleries exposed, Benjamin Wallace faces backlash over mismanagement and lies. Former curator Alexandra Wallace speaks out, reveals family betrayal at Luxora Galleries. Benjamin's narrative crumbled. Public sentiment swung dramatically in my favor as evidence emerged of his deception. Investors retreated, realizing they'd been misled. The gallery's board called an emergency meeting, demanding Benjamin step down. One evening, Benjamin himself knocked at my door, looking defeated and exhausted. "Alex," he began quietly, genuine remorse filling his eyes for once. "You won. I'm stepping aside. The board wants you back. It's yours now, everything." I studied him silently. This was the victory I'd imagined. Vindication, justice, my rightful place restored. But as I faced Benjamin, suddenly it felt hollow. I realized that my true victory wasn't reclaiming the gallery. It was freeing myself from his shadow entirely. "No, Benjamin," I replied gently but firmly. "I don't want it. The gallery was your dream, not mine. My dreams deserve their own space." He looked startled, confused. "But what now?" "Now," I said softly, stepping aside, "you live with the consequences. Maybe you'll finally learn something." As Benjamin walked away, I felt lighter. The weight of expectations and resentment fell away. I had finally broken free, not by reclaiming the gallery, but by reclaiming myself. The gallery's fate was no longer my burden. For the first time, the future felt entirely mine. 2 months after the fallout with my family's publishing house, I stood alone in front of a quaint lakeside cottage I'd recently bought. The morning sun glittered off the calm water, promising something I'd never genuinely known: peace. This new beginning wasn't born from spite or bitterness. It was simply freedom. The freedom I'd spent years fighting for. I'd grown up in the shadow of Harcourt Books, my father's prestigious publishing empire. My brother, Marcus, had always been his chosen successor, the heir who would carry our legacy forward. I had loved literature deeply, editing manuscripts and nurturing authors behind the scenes, hoping someday I'd earn my father's acknowledgement. But I'd eventually realized that no matter how many bestsellers I edited or new authors I discovered, the spotlight would always belong to Marcus. When I finally chose to leave, my decision was met with confusion and hostility. The first few weeks were difficult. I missed the routine, the excitement of discovering fresh talent, and, strangely, the chaotic drama of family life. But gradually, clarity set in. I wasn't abandoning my family. I was freeing myself from their expectations. Just as I'd started settling into a new rhythm, my phone rang. Marcus's name flashed across the screen, surprising me. I hesitated but finally answered. "Marcus," I said calmly, "to what do I owe this surprise?" "Elise," he replied, tension evident. "I don't want to bother you, but Dad collapsed yesterday. He's in the hospital." The news hit like cold water. My father was tough, uncompromising, always in control. Imagining him hospitalized felt surreal. "What happened?" I asked carefully. "He suffered a heart attack," Marcus explained quietly. "Doctors say it's stress-related. Harcourt Books is struggling badly since you left, and Dad has been pushing himself relentlessly." I swallowed a mix of worry and guilt. Despite our complicated relationship, the thought of losing him was terrifying. "Is he stable?" I asked, voice strained. "For now," Marcus sighed heavily. "But he asked for you, Elise. I think he regrets what happened." I closed my eyes, my pulse racing. My father had never once expressed regret, not about sidelining me, not about openly favoring Marcus. Was he really sorry, or was this another manipulation? "Please, Elise," Marcus urged softly, "just come see him. For all our differences, he's still our father." Conflicted but unable to refuse, I agreed. The next day, I stood anxiously outside his hospital room. My father lay quietly, looking older and more vulnerable than I'd ever seen him. Marcus stood beside him, offering a cautious nod as I entered. "Elise," my father rasped weakly, a faint smile crossing his lips. "You came." I approached carefully, a lump forming in my throat. "How are you feeling?" He sighed softly, like someone finally showed me my limits. A heavy silence followed before he continued slowly. Marcus told me you're thriving without us. Starting your own agency? I nodded hesitantly. I wanted something of my own. He glanced away, ashamed. I underestimated you. Always assumed you'd stay loyal no matter how poorly we treated you. Hearing him acknowledge it felt strange yet validating. For years, I'd waited desperately to hear those words. I'm sorry, Elise. He murmured sincerely, holding my gaze. Not just for this, but for everything. You deserved better. My vision blurred, emotions tightening my chest. Still, I spoke firmly. Thank you. I needed to hear that. Marcus gently touched my shoulder, offering silent support. My father continued slowly, regret evident. Harcourt Books needs you. Marcus can't carry the burden alone. If you came back, I'd step aside, let you both rebuild together. It was the offer I'd once dreamed of. A partnership, respect, genuine acknowledgement. But as I stood there, something had shifted. The words were comforting, yet I realized with crystal clarity that this was no longer what I wanted. My journey away from Harcourt had taught me something crucial. I didn't need my father's approval to thrive. Taking a deep breath, I gently replied, Dad, I appreciate your words deeply, but I can't return. My future isn't there anymore. His expression saddened, but he nodded slowly, understanding. I feared you'd say that. You're stronger than I gave you credit for. Marcus smiled faintly, proud and supportive. For once there was no rivalry between us, only mutual respect. The days afterward passed quietly. My father improved steadily, and Marcus took control of the family business, growing into the role he'd always been meant for. We spoke occasionally, and he genuinely respected my decision. My father, still recovering, became less authoritative, more introspective, genuinely accepting my choice. One afternoon, Marcus visited me at the lakeside cottage. Sitting together by the lake, he admitted softly, It feels strange without you at Harcourt. I smiled, watching the gentle ripple of water. It was stranger for me, staying there and never truly belonging. He nodded thoughtfully. I was always jealous of your talent, Elise. Dad praised me publicly, but privately, he knew you were the real force behind the company's successes. Surprised, I turned toward him. He told you that? Marcus smiled quietly. He did. He's not good at apologies, but I think this was his way of admitting he misjudged you. He genuinely respects you now. Warmth blossomed within me, replacing years of hidden resentment. That's all I ever wanted. After Marcus left, I walked alone along the lakeshore, the sun lowering gently, painting the sky in golden hues. My father's validation was healing, but I no longer depended on it. My life had become mine completely, built on my terms, not others' expectations. Later that evening, my phone lit up with an email. It was from my father, brief yet powerful. Elise, I'm proud of you. Truly. You found strength when we gave you none. I regret not seeing your value sooner. Build something extraordinary, something purely yours. I stared at the words, tears filling my eyes. This wasn't about winning. It was about liberation. My father's words had once meant everything, but now they were simply affirmation. Not a necessity. Stepping onto the porch, gazing at the stars beginning to flicker, I felt wholly myself for the first time. No longer overshadowed or defined by others. My past was finally just that, the past. And my future felt wonderfully, gloriously unwritten.